66. Cue the news music because it's a special current event episode.
I will say this. I have been not wanting to have this episode.
Why?
Just because I think it's nonsensical.
I think that the specific topic is nonsensical, but I think the underlying effect is almost universal. Just if you pick it, everybody has their special flavor of something that really triggers them.
Yes.
And the election just happens to trigger a lot of people.
Yeah. So I don't want this to be so I guess maybe just to preface it, our goal is not for this to be an episode about the election. The goal is for it to be the episode about what is actually happening, how it relates to the greater narrative of awakening or knowing yourself or feeling uncomfortable or facing your fears or processing trauma. And then obviously pipe back into the kind of the overall scheme of the podcast, which is basically awakening in life.
Yeah.
And this just is, it's a very, such a.
Well, see the thing. Yeah. Well, let's give some backstory.
So we were, we have been at least 2 weeks since the election.
Today's the
18th.
18th.
And then
of November.
We've been, we recorded several episodes
of
podcasts, and I've been trying not to record this one. But then we were guided to, or I was guided to go to a mindfulness meeting about the current feelings of election.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know why, other than obviously I went there to hold space, which was obvious. As we went, I guess I got to interpret the physical interpretation of everybody else's physical reaction. The actual outflow. And there was just such a shocking, you hear, I guess we didn't follow the election at all for the most part. I didn't follow the election at all. And I obviously voted one way versus the other. But I'm in no way attached to married to one in you for your run, or even greater opinion of good versus bad, right? Because I realize assigning any value to the scales of good versus bad is just propagating fear or breeding fear, right? So I think you and I have been very unattached to it. But then obviously I was guided to this event to see other people's visceral attachment. And then the despair that it generated.
Yeah, despair is a good word. I was surprised.
Yeah, no, I was in shock. And so the reason why we're having this episode is because I think there's people out there who feel, I think both sides feel something that in no way actually belongs in that place. And I will clarify that, or I don't know if we should clarify that now. But the projection of everything that they feel internally that is coming up has been inserted to the most interesting extent into the outcome of this election from both sides. And so both sides are using this platform as opinions about the election or the perceptions of the future or the mission into the future or the fear into the future as their personal playground for blindness. And that's what was shocking, is that is how deep it went and continues to go. And I think the reason why we're recording this is probably because it will continue to happen. People will continue to use election and different nuances of good and bad to propagate personal blindness.
Yeah, as an excuse. It's something out there in the world that they can point to and go, this is the reason I feel this way. This is what's wrong with the world. The election's just a very convenient one now, but go back a year, go forward a year, it'll be something else. the economy or, bill at the office or whatever. There's always something.
There's always bill at the office.
Bill at the office. A jerk. There's always something out there that is easy to point to as the cause, the sole cause of all of our, I guess I mean that in both ways, don't I?
Yeah.
Of all of our, what really are internal problems. And yesterday when we went there, I don't know what I was expecting. I was expecting people who were like mildly disappointed. That's what I was expecting. But some of these people were full on losing it. There were people who were literally shaking on the verge of tears, and someone else said that they literally blame God for this. And how could God let us down? How could God have done this to the country? And I'm just like, oh, this is a lot more serious than I thought it was.
Yeah.
I did not realize
it's not serious.
They're taking it a lot more serious than I thought it was.
Yeah. And so, I mean, obviously, just by your sentiment, it comes out to we went to a mindfulness event that was mostly populated, I would say, by the Democratic voters.
The sore losers, huh?
Shut up. Right. And so even though we will be talking about that event and what we saw based on this particular outflow.
This is not specific to this.
This is not specific to one side.
This just happens to be a very poignant example.
Yeah, maybe. So if we are going to bring example, maybe let's even the playing field and to drive example from both parties of adamant blindness to the root cause of their distress.
Yeah, I mean,
and how propagation into a political narrative.
4 years ago, it was the exact opposite.
Yeah,
there was a lot of people on that side of the fence that were really upset.
Yeah.
And now there's a whole lot of people on this side that are really upset.
Yeah, but 4 year cycle later, we're in the same situation, and we will be in the same situations for the rest of our life. There will always be something in this world that will be triggering that will seem like the most important thing ever, when it has nothing to do with anything other than unprocessed trauma that you already have inside from way back before this 4 year cycle or that 4 year cycle or this 4 year cycle. And the fear, unprocessed fear and unprocessed trauma that you have within you is sitting there and festering, being unrecognized, and you're grabbing on to anything out there. In this case, it's Democratic opinions versus Republican opinions, and justifying why this feeling inside that you already have is somehow valid because you're drawing a present moment narrative to that feeling.
What became really apparent was the level of attachment everybody had to the outcome of the election. And I assume that's why I'm not losing it and you're not losing it, is that we were largely unattached to how this goes. That doesn't mean you don't have an opinion. That doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you don't vote for whoever you think is going to do better. But when I say attachment, there's like a charge that you feel, because I've been attached to a lot of things in my life, and I know that feeling of like, I really care about this. I'm currently editing the Tenerife episode, and I really cared about getting the airplane on time.
Yeah, we're still talking about it.
There's an influx. Your heart starts beating faster. You get all worked up about it. That's a charge. You're attached to something with that.
Yeah, but it's almost beyond that scenario. You're like, your life is on the line.
I mean, then you're really attached, is what.
That's what I'm saying, right? Like if we can relate back to us arriving to the airport on time, it's like it's bigger than life.
It was the most important thing in the world at that time, which is crazy, right? I mean, I'm like, okay, I know this was like less than a month ago, and I'm like, I was an idiot, just losing it over something that even if it had gone horribly wrong, it's okay.
Yeah.
And same thing here.
All
there are a lot of
perspective was
people who
lost.
think the election went horribly wrong.
Yes.
but that's okay. It's
But you
there's this
surrender.
and acceptance, and life does, life is perfect, but that doesn't mean that everything happens in your life. It's not like
Rainbows and butterflies.
rainbows and butterflies. There are rainbows and butterflies, but there are also hurricanes and tornadoes. Welcome to Earth. So I guess where I was going is, that's like one of the tenets of Buddhism, is that attachment is the cause of suffering. And these people were very much suffering. And it was clear that it was just because of the attachment they had to. If they were not attached to the outcome of that election, they wouldn't even have been there, because it doesn't matter.
Yeah. But that for them, that attachment propagated, attachment in this case is only there because they think that this outcome will mitigate everything they fear behind it. That's why attachment is there, right?
Right. They're attached to this because this has become a placeholder to block off whatever they have inside. There's something inside that this is poking, this is throwing gasoline on.
Mm-hmm.
And now this is what we have to blame, the election. When it's really, there's stuff inside. They're not content in and of itself. They weren't content before the election. They weren't content after the election. Had the Democrats won the election, they still wouldn't be content, but they wouldn't have this to point to.
Yeah.
This may pacify pacify it in the same way that alcohol pacifies it. If Harris had won, so okay, it feels like rainbows and butterflies for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
Whiskey feels like rainbows and butterflies for a little while too. But those are rainbows and butterflies that are kind of band-aided over a tornado inside.
Yeah. And so I don't know if this is the time to get into this or not. I thought everything that happens in our life, just like with you and me, everything we've been going through for the last 4 or 5 years, just trying to understand where the attachments are coming from, what fear is actually behind whatever current event we're masking our outcome or our behaviors to. Everything in life is kind of an opportunity to see through the smoke and mirrors of the current circumstance that you are grabbing onto. It is, the circumstance is irrelevant. Like any one political decision, any one being late to the airport, any one fight with your spouse is actually irrelevant.
Right. If you see it on the news, it's irrelevant.
I mean, there's that too, right? But what's relevant behind it is the lesson you can learn onto, wait, what is my level of attachment that I have into this? Why am I so invested into this decision outcome, somebody else believing my opinion, or, us not being late to the airport? And what is actually deeper rooted in there? What deep fear, and this is the truth, what deep fear do I have behind if this doesn't go this way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all does boil down to fear. The guy yesterday used the word trauma a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but he used it in the sense that
he was a clinical psychologist. So,
yeah. Well,
trauma.
He used it in the sense that, to a lot of Democrats, what happened was a traumatic event.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, sure, I guess I can see that. But what was glossed over, or maybe not even mentioned at all, was all of the deep trauma that the election triggered. That wasn't
yeah, right.
Out. But maybe that's for your next session.
Yeah, but that's almost like, I was thinking, because I'm obviously always evaluating what is the best way to deliver something, and then obviously I have my very crude approach to delivery.
Stop it.
I was analyzing that. That was something that came out from me. It's just like
it was a lot of. It felt really. I don't know. Is touchy-feely the right word? Really overly gentle.
But
maybe that's what people need. I don't know.
I guess, there's an approach that works with most people, and most people, I think, respond well from the clinical psychologist standpoint to very slow and gentle nudges. And so, I guess you and I have been to one therapist together, two therapists together, and
I've seen several on my own, and it's too slow. It's too slow for me. It's too.
Yeah,
let's get to it.
You come in. This is why our podcasts are what they are. This is why I like Kundalini, right? The lady who has passed away, who does the Kundalini sessions that I watch. She said that she's like, I want results and I want them fast, and I know that sounds impatient, but it's not that. It's that if you come and you are committed and you're looking for hope and you're looking for change and you're looking for even a little nudge of a needle, just a little nudge of a needle. I feel like you need to feel the needle nudge. You need to you need to walk in, because if I'm walking into therapy, if I'm walking into any kind of mindfulness session or any kind of anything, and I'm not saying yes, you did not do that, but I'm just saying the difference between maybe my approach and the world is, if I walk in, guess what? Chances are I'm on the precipice of going, wait, something's not fucking working for me and I need help, right? Because I'm walking into a therapy session or a mindfulness session because I know something. And then two is, something needs to come out of it. I need to know that there's an outcome. And, if I'm on the precipice of some sort of mental breakdown, there needs to be this like larger energy flowing at me to where it can override whatever state that I am in.
I want a psychological slap in the face.
Yeah. In the last podcast, I brought up that cold shower, right? Is a nervous system override.
Yeah.
And then since then, actually, I thought, oh, that's interesting, because right as I said that, like the next day on Instagram, I saw that if you take your hands and if you put them in a bowl of cold iced water, like, with ice, and I think she said for 30 seconds, it does the same thing. Right? So like you don't have to, because I was thinking like, oh, you're not going to climb into a shower in the middle of the day. But the cold, cold.
I've splashed, however cold it is out of the tap, just splash water on my face. Yeah.
And I was thinking like, we don't even have ice in the house. So I don't even know where we even get ice for that. Right. But yeah, just.
You can take the peas out of the freezer and put them on your face, I guess.
That's true. Yeah, it's true. The roller almost has that shocking effect a little bit.
Especially depends on where.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And so my approach, I think, to our podcast and to my approach to therapy, obviously it's not clinical approved therapy because no clinical therapist would ever approve my approach. But
specifically disapproved stamp.
Yes. But I think that is why you and I are where we are right now, at the rate of which we have progressed into this spot.
Yeah.
It's because my approach is the energy on the end that will generate change has to be greater than the energy inputted from the patient or from the receiver or from me as someone who's being triggered or overridden.
Right. And the inertia of a patient is a lot of energy.
Yeah.
I mean, and if someone's going to something like this, if someone's going to therapy, it's because they have a desire to change. You don't go because you don't want to change.
Yes.
You're wasting time and money.
Yes.
So there is some force there.
No, you coming there already opened to the prospect of change. If you're
Yeah.
going into therapy, you're like, oh, look, here's this professional individual who knows better than I do, or at least has the toolkit to tell me something.
Right.
And then the goal of the therapist, again, I'm not a clinical therapist, but I think that is the failure with the certified ones, is they do not match the inertia necessary to offset the patient's override.
Right. I mean, I imagine there's some skill in like
Tactful?
being tactfulness and matching it to a degree, because I don't know if someone's, depending on their mental state or whatever, different approaches might work. I don't know. Also not a clinical therapist, but I do agree that from my experience, every time I ever met with somebody, it was too little, too slow. And it's, the session is full, we're always talking, which is fine. Cause in the end, what does it boil down to? It boils down to talking, right? It's just words going back and forth. There's no lack of that, but I always wondered, like, okay, so what do I do? What specific instructions what are my takeaways here? What, like almost like a business meeting. It's like,
yeah. But
this was productive because now I know to do X, or I know to not do X, or whatever. And it doesn't, I'm sorry, it doesn't have to be a thing to do. It doesn't have to be an action out into the world. It could be, shift your focus this way, or try not to think about that, or try not, whatever it is. There could be some sort of action. It could be, meditate and go inside, and that's probably the best general advice there is. But yeah.
Yeah. And the approach yesterday was not wrong, in a sense that whenever you are feeling triggered and you're experiencing enormous trauma, which in this case, they classified the event as traumatic, right? Without addressing like, oh, it's your personal trauma. They didn't go there. The right thing to do is to pause and retrospect on the inside, and to basically try to see things as love, which is true. All of those things are true.
Right.
But then it left everything and everybody unfulfilled in their action towards, well, how do I not feel like shit right now?
Right. Specifically, my recommendation would be the letting go, David Hawkins' letting go process, where you feel it. Just like, okay, the election went this way, and now I'm all worked up. Well, what do you feel? Your whole why thing, combined with the letting go. It's like, well, I feel worked up because I don't know how it's going to be, and I'm scared. Okay, well, it turns into fear. It always turns into fear. Spoiler alert. But you have to. It really helps if you can figure out what that fear is. And that fear, well, I'm afraid that if he, I don't know what the
right. It's so nonsensical
it is. In this case, it is really, really nebulous, which makes it even harder to solidify. But even if you have immigrants will be deported, and I'm an immigrant, right? Let's say, and so I'm afraid for my safety.
But in that case, that's like 0.001% of the people that would ever feel that.
There was nobody there yesterday too, but
where that sentiment, the fear of that sentiment, is coming from, is not from the immigrants themselves, because the immigrants themselves actually voted for Trump. So
we've already fallen off the rails.
No, but what I'm saying is, if that is indeed the fear, right? The fear is not actually you caring about any one specific immigrant. I'm not saying that you should not care for any one specific immigrant. I'm an immigrant. I'm a refugee. So, I know what it is like to come here and not to feel welcomed and feel like you're an outsider and just trying to make things work. And then you're afraid whether or not your green card will get approved, or, whatever. Like, oh, wait, as a refugee, we had to get a green card first. And And then only after we had a green card, but for a very short period of time, then we can apply for citizenship, right? But there was fear of like, wait, will it get approved? No. Why would it not? Why would it? But you just don't know, right? You don't know.
Right.
And like, can I stay here?
No, I mean, I picked that example because I'm like, well, what if there's some concrete example that does come to pass, that now there's actually, quote, something to be afraid of.
Yeah.
Versus right now, it's all very nebulous and at the best, and it's definitely in the future. It's not even there's today.
Yeah. But if you're an immigrant, maybe let's just take this example and show how you would run with an example. If you're an immigrant and if you're afraid of being deported based on whatever nebulous future that might or might not be, right? The fear obviously is for the safety of you and your family, and for the fact that, will or will I not, be deported? Like, what is my future? So the future of the unknown, right? And then it would get triggered into like, okay, then I go back to a bad situation. If you left a bad situation, like we left a bad situation in Ukraine, right? And if I get deported, I'm like, well, heck, I start all over in the country that I fled.
And now it's the worst situation.
Well, yeah, right. Right now, to be reported to Ukraine would, I would probably be flipping the fuck out, right? But then I would center in and go, well, depending on the outcome, right? Nothing is not manageable, right? If I see everything for what it is, right? In the long run, right? At this one moment, you see things with your actual, am I dying right now? Am I in charge of my destiny? Am I in charge of my future? Is there not a legal way for me to get back in, right? Is there is this imminent? Let's say worst case scenario, I am on the bus and I am being flown over to Ukraine.
There's always Canada.
But do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
The disasteration of the situation can continue on and on and on. And there's countless ways in the future it could or could not go to where nothing is predictable. But in a moment right now, you can learn to regulate and go, look, I'm just being triggered into unsafety.
Right. We are really good at catastrophizing. It's like you take, oh my gosh, the election went this way, ... Next thing I know, I am literally staring down the barrel of a Russian tank. That is exactly where it's going to go, and they're going to shoot me in the face with the tank. This is a certainty, is how it feels. I've done this with things that are just as ridiculous. It is just human nature to
mitigate.
What's the worst that can happen? It always goes, what's the worst that can happen? It never goes, what's the best that can happen? It's always, what's the worst?
Because you're triggered into the deepest wound of yourself, which is unsafety, right? Me thinking about even the prospect of me right now being deported away from my family, right? Because that's what it would be. Mm-hmm. And then being separated from my family, and then my children are left in the United States, and you're left in the United States, and I'm over there alone in Ukraine, now having to fight the war with Russia. Do you know what I mean? Like, it is so ridiculous. The only thing that I can go back to would be, or look, it is trigger of me feeling unsafe as a child and feeling alone and unwanted and abandoned.
Right.
And I don't have a way to fend for myself as a child. It goes back to me being a child, right? Because that triggers me not seeing myself as an adult and go, oh, well, guess what? I can probably pick up a gun and start shooting. I don't know. Or like, do you know what I mean? But I see myself as a child. The trauma quite literally rewrites your narrative into you seeing yourself as a child, and you're helpless and you're alone, unsafe, unwanted, and there's no one there to help. That is the only thing I can see that this trauma would bring into me as a refugee, as an immigrant who would be afraid of being deported. Do you see what I mean?
Right.
It is not me, a 40-something-year-old right now who has a means and tenacity to do something. It is me as a child. And that is what no one saw and no one sees in this extrapolation of disasteration of this political outcome, is that at the end of that trigger, at the end of that disasteration or of that trauma that they're facing right now, the helplessness that they're feeling is not the helplessness of them as a 50-year-old, 60-year-old, 40-year-old, 30-year-old. It's a helplessness of them as a child.
I mean,
they feel unequipped as a child.
Yeah. I mean, it's all, I mean, it ties in. It's all childhood trauma. It all boils down to that.
What I'm saying is the reason why it feels so overwhelming and so big is because they don't know how to address it or what to do with it. Because in their mind, trauma, they don't see who's looking through these eyes is not them as a capable adult right now who can go, well, guess what? I'll go and stand at the border and protest Mexican deportation, or stand at the border and make sure Ukrainians don't get loaded back on the planes to ship back to the war zone. Whatever. They are seeing themselves as a child who is incapable of doing anything in their life. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. The helplessness comes out.
Right. And these are, we were perhaps the youngest people there. These are adults, well into adults, senior level adults.
But
it never leaves. The childhood wounds, the childhood mentality, I don't mean child mentality, but like
the trauma.
The childhood
gets amplified when you get older.
I mean,
if you never addressed your trauma in your 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, come 60s, that trauma is more visceral than ever.
It's even more deep rooted.
You're more of a child then than you were in your 30s or 40s.
Was it? Oh, we've heard this before. Was it Bruce Lipton's program that says, the first 7 years of your life, you're basically programmed how you're going to. You're programmed by not maliciously, but by your parents, by society, by your friends, by your experience. This is basically the foundation of you. And in that, it's like, oh, if you felt unsafe, you're going to feel unsafe forever. And you're going to go out and you're going to see unsafety in the world, and it's going to trigger you. And for me, I felt unloved. And so I see lack of love everywhere, and it triggers me. And that's whatever your special flavor of trauma was instilled in you very early in your life, and it will stick with you till the day you die. Welcome to being human. But if you have awareness of that, then you can at least go, oh, look, this makes me feel unsafe. And even the guy yesterday said it, and I know this is true. You can't logic it away. You can't go, oh, well, really, you've been a U.S. citizen for 20 years, and you're not in the target ethnic groups to be deported, and well, okay, so it's unlikely that you would, okay, you can't logic it out. It doesn't work. Even if it makes no sense, there's some nugget that still feels like, well, maybe it could happen or something. Logic isn't the answer to it. Logic may help after the fact, but it isn't the end all be all of
releasing trauma.
Releasing trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. But the reason why the trauma is so overwhelming, I guess that's sort of the point I was trying to make, is it's because the trauma is being looked at and processed from the standpoint of under 7-year-old child.
Yeah.
Where you don't have the tools and the equipment to even recognize that that's trauma, and then much less know what to do with it.
Right. It was instilled at that early age, and it still has that trauma is associated with the emotional maturity of a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
And here we are, high functioning adults, and we're like, yeah, but I don't feel loved. And it's the end of the world. It feels like the end of the world. I cannot over exaggerate this enough. That's my flavor. Your unsafety, it feels like the end of the world.
But it feels like the end of the world. These people
who are shaking and crying and blaming God, this feels like the end of the world.
But think about it. If you're 7 years old and your world is crumbling for all intents and purposes, which is the narrative that they're propagating, and you're 7, let's be honest, you just have to see them as 7-year-olds.
It feels like the end of the world to them.
What are you going to do about it? You feel hopeless, right? You feel unequipped and hopeless because you don't recognize that the eyes from which you perceive this reality are the eyes of a broken child. If I had any advice to anyone who is struggling from any side of things, but obviously the democratic side of things is struggling because the trauma is viscerally in their face, more so than those who feel like they have been vindicated. Yeah, sure. Is because you're facing the trauma of your much smaller self, but from a much larger narrative, and you're masking it with current day events that are irrelevant, right? And the right way to address this is similar to what everybody else is saying, is to go within, or what we have always been saying, to go within and to start looking at yourself from the trauma of your childhood.
Yeah.
And it is the most difficult thing you could possibly do. And it's the place that nobody wants to go. And, that exasperated notion of sense that I feel at all times is that everything in this world, such as a political situation or any one outcome or any one decision or any one idea or even any one political slogan that anybody ran with and they think that is going to happen, or the fear that you're propagating into the future, is irrelevant and nonsensical. And whether it does or does not come into fruition, that is an irrelevant topic to have. And logically, it's also irrelevant. And the only thing that you could possibly address and see is, what is triggering me? And why am I so fixated on something that has nothing to do with me in this moment of right now? In this moment when you're sitting and you're literally blaming God for a political outcome, what am I actually angry about? What am I actually blaming God for? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. You're blaming God for how you feel, is what it is.
Yes, but then what is it that I feel? And deep down, she has taken that concept and projected.
Her voice was trembling. She was crying. She was scared.
She was scared and crying.
She was terrified. I don't know. It's hard for me to say what eventuality she's afraid is going to happen. I don't know. But assume it's something bad. I guess it doesn't matter.
It's not that. The sentiment there was the God has forsaken her. And instead of going, why do I think that God
has forsaken all of us, was how she worded it.
But again, if we look at this as a narrative that takes us away from our personal narrative, then it's false.
Yes.
So the false narrative in this person's sentiment was, why has God forsaken us? Which is false. If the narrative takes you outside of yourself and you go, us, right? If you're the reason why she's doing that is because she feels like this is detrimental to survival of whole humanity, let's say. But it has nothing to do with anything other than her personal trauma. But because it feels so overwhelming and so large, and she feels completely unequipped to deal with it, she disasterizes and extrapolates it onto Earth, right? It might as well be Earth. Honestly, it might as well be universal, because God is responsible for the universe. And this is all life will come to an end on entire universe because God has forsaken us. It was that big of a sentiment.
It felt like that.
That was the energy behind it. But so word us was used, and large words are used to take the overwhelm and push it out into a large narrative. But the truth is, what if you take us out of it? And what if you go I? What if you go into the I? And if this is just me, and if this is not a narrative, and if I'm not trying to exaggerate, and if I'm not trying to overblow it, and if I'm just what am I responsible for? What is inside of me, right? Then the only thing you can see there is that she feels forsaken by God on her own.
Personally.
Period. And then the question then you have to ask is, why do I feel like God has forsaken me? In this case, it would be a religious narrative. So therefore, she feels like she probably has done something wrong personally in order for God to forsaken her. Because I think that is what the religious Catholic narrative teaches, is if you are a sinner, then you do wrong things, that God forsakens you, correct?
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know. But I don't know.
Right.
But
But I
I'm
mean,
just,
but is it like, I mean, from that extent, I mean, she may feel that she is personally responsible for the whole election going this way.
she could feel that.
Like, oh, geez, if I didn't,
Sin.
I didn't, buy 2 bananas and pay for one. If I hadn't done that, then maybe the election would have gone a different way.
Well, in this case, I can draw a narrative. Like, I could read her and tell you exactly what it is. I'm not going to go there, but the other thing she said is, and I'm taking care of my mother, and how is she going to deal with it? So in her case, the sin is somehow related to her mother, because the right after the words narrated out of, oh, God has forsaken us and how we're supposed to continue to live forward, and now I'm angry at God. The next thought that came out of, and now I'm taking care of my mother. So she, in her case, feels like a bad daughter, not doing a good job taking care of her mother, and sin is somehow related to that. And then therefore, this overblown perspective is her losing herself and feeling like a sinner in that standpoint somehow. And then the whole election is, the dumbbell that is sitting on top of her.
I guess I completely missed it. I was still fixated on, oh, wow, because there are a whole lot of political things in the past that if God could have intervened in, maybe Hitler wouldn't have come to power. Maybe Stalin would have, so on your hierarchy of things that God should have intervened in, this isn't at the top for me.
But, logically it doesn't even make sense, right?
I was just like, God gets a pass with Hitler and Stalin, and you name it. There's all kinds of absolutely terrible people throughout history.
What about Ukraine right now?
Sure.
What about Israel
Putin,
right now?
Sure. Oh, you pick them.
What about
What
about the Mexicans right now?
There's any number of absolutely terrible things that God could have intervened in, quote unquote, and this is the one that you hate God for. I was taken aback by the blindness and the power of that statement. That means that this is so triggering, so much more than I could wrap my head around. So much more than the Holocaust, or you pick a horrible tragedy. There's so many of them. And this is more important than that. Enough to basically curse God in front of a church full of people. Blame God for it.
No, she said she felt guilty for blaming God.
So there's some more.
But she felt
guilty
as a sinner. She felt like she was sinning by hating God for this.
Yeah.
So she literally,
and that's only making it worse.
No. But she literally stated her own truth. I feel like a sinner.
It's
period.
great that she said it. It's horrible that, there's all these, I feel this way, but I feel bad that I feel this way. That's unfortunate.
No, the only unfortunate thing is her saying that went judged by probably everybody there, or those who actually felt that way. It went unaddressed from this standpoint of, this is not about the election. This is not about you actually hating God. This is about you hating yourself somehow taking the blame for something. In her case, probably about taking care of her mother improperly, or not being good enough daughter to take care of her elderly mother. And there's some guilt and resentment.
Or perhaps resentment for having to take care of her mother.
It's both. It's both. Whenever a caretaker gets presented with that, they feel resentment, and then they feel guilty about their resentment because it's overwhelming and it's overriding their life. And then the anger that they feel about themselves feeling angry then extrapolates out, because they can't put that onto the mother, and they can't put it onto this idea that I just feel overwhelmed and then I feel overburdened, and then what? But they feel wrong feeling that way, and so therefore they're stuck. They're stuck, and they don't know where to go. And the only thing that they can feel is guilt, and then the guilt then has to be bigger than, because they don't understand the circle. And then in her case, because she's super probably indoctrinated into religious rhetoric, then it extrapolates out onto God, because there's no one else to hold responsible.
Yeah.
Other than herself.
In that context, God has the ultimate responsibility. Like if the buck stops anywhere, it stops with God, right? He's the ultimate arbiter of everything.
Well, I don't know how religious indoctrination works.
I mean, if he is omnipotent and all powerful and all knowing, then he, quote, could have done something.
Yeah.
But the fact that he didn't means, I don't know what.
She feels hopeless.
Yeah.
Right. She already feels hopeless as a child. She already feels unequipped and without tools to handle the overflow of emotional trauma that she's feeling in that moment. That the only way, there you go. I kind of suffered from that as a child. That felt so scared and so alone and unequipped to handle safety, that the thought process of safety, that I would grab on to any external stimuli. By external, I mean extra sensory stimuli that would offer me safety, right? Because the physical world did not provide safety. And then the situation around my upbringing did not provide safety. Instead of, God is kind of external stimuli, right?
Sure.
But to me, it was also extrasensory too, right? So I thought comfort from this voice that told me that I was safe. Did I attribute it to God? Did I attribute it to something larger? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it was something, as a child, that is what I grabbed onto to hold on to as a little safety net. Do you know what I mean? As someone saying to hold. I know it's really sad. But that is how everybody feels. Every single one of those people in that room feels like a broken child, unsafe, unloved, unwanted, and does not have the answer nor the equipment to carry and process the overburden of the emotional trauma that they have coming up. And that is extremely sad and extremely concerning, I guess, that to some extent, even the space yesterday, I think everybody left not feeling much better about it.
That's the thing. I mean,
they felt pacified into like, okay, you just recognize that you're dealing with trauma and just sit back, relax, and just give yourself space to feel your trauma. But then the truth is, their question, I would think, would be, how do I deal with this overwhelm of trauma? How do I?
That wasn't answered.
How do I? If I am in this moment completely overrun with this inertia of emotion, somebody on the other end has to give me enough inertia back to give me actionable outcome. That is how it would work for me. Actionable outcome to where you can calm my system down.
Yeah, like literal steps would have been helpful. I mean, the guy who was the licensed therapist, he, what he said, I agree with, but I'm like, he could have gone further. He's like, we all feel something. That's fine. Don't deny your feelings.
Acknowledge what you're feeling.
Whatever you feel, that's your truth. You may be angry, you may be scared, you may be happy, you may be whatever. That's fine. Own it.
Yes.
Basically, I agree with that.
Yeah.
He said, now is not necessarily the time for action. I don't know what action there is, but whatever, it doesn't matter. I think the point was,
when you're triggered, it's not the right time. When you're
triggered, it's not, I think that's the point. When you're triggered, it's not necessarily the time for action, because you might do a dumb action, an overreaction.
Yeah.
Or, let's, wait until we've calmed ourselves down. That's about the same thing. Something else he said.
Being with self, like just allowing yourself to
Yeah.
feel. I think that was the biggest thing that came out. Is just allow yourself to feel your truth.
Yeah.
But then I guess
Where it did
why we're talking
yeah.
about it.
Yeah, no, yeah, and he brought up trauma. He really associated with trauma, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's right. This is trauma. It really feels like trauma," which is true.
Yeah.
But he didn't go into A, the deeper trauma inside of everybody, and B, what do you do? Okay, you feel this. All right, I've got it. Now I've got to, be with it for a while. Okay. And that's not a bad first step. But as far as I know, there isn't a part 2 of this meeting. So
there might be.
So here's 50, 100 people going, and then what?
Yeah. And so maybe that is where I wanted to take this. We don't have to talk too much about it, but the flow of every event that comes into our life, right? Where trauma, and it feels like this is a new trauma that coming in, is just there as an opportunity to bring up our old trauma for processing, right? And instead of being triggered and then blaming God or bringing us into the narrative or going, oh, it's us against them, in any way trying to triangulate and make the situation bigger, the goal is to go within, just like, it was suggested, just like we're saying, and to see what is it that is coming in within me that I could learn from this, and then possibly acknowledge of how this relates to me from my childhood. How is what happening right now that feels so big in any way correlates or relates to my sentiment when I was a child?
Yeah, this makes me feel something. What's the earliest thing I can think of that made me feel like that?
What, back when I was a child?
Back when I was a wee lad. And or maybe in a past life too.
Oh, past life would by default
would feed into early childhood.
You would. So it would just come in there. And so if I feel this overwhelmed and I feel this hopeless, and there's this fear, like, what am I afraid of? Why am I cursing God? Why am I feel alone? Why do I feel like this is the end of the world? What is it about that sentiment that would cause me to overblow this proportionally? But let's say you don't believe this, but let's say to take this idea and go, how is this similar to anything else in my childhood that I felt?
Right. And when we say similar, it's not like it had anything to do with an election or anything. It's like, oh, when I was, 5, I got left at the store from Uncle Joe or what, it would be something that doesn't on the surface look similar, but it made you feel similar. That's how we feel. That's really the driving thing here.
Well, maybe let's dissect this into the two political parties or two terms. So from the Democratic standpoint, the trauma that most of the people would be facing, deep-rooted, like right on the surface, it might be anger and frustrations, but then it settles down into hopelessness, right? But the hopelessness then settles down into fear, and the fear is coming out of childhood trauma, childhood development. And so if you're on the Democratic end and you feel hopeless, and you feel like there's no future, and you feel like there's no way to go on, and you're not prepared, and you are afraid of the unknown, all of those little words that I just said all go down to hopelessness because you don't know what to do with the current situation.
We should almost make, like, the emotional color wheel. We should make the childhood trauma color wheel.
Maybe we should.
It turns into that.
Right. And then the hopelessness, just realize because you were 7 or under 7 and you didn't have a vocabulary, even much less an emotional brain understanding of like, wait, here's what I actually feel, and here's the toolkit. You're right. You were just clueless. The hopelessness comes out because you're still looking at this scenario from that broken child standpoint to where you feel unequipped to be able to deal with this emotional outflow. But yet now that you're an adult and you're feeling this, go back into your childhood and go, wait, but now I do. I'm an adult and I know the emotional range and I know that there's such thing as fear and guilt and whatever. What am I afraid of that I was also afraid of when I was a child, when I felt this hopelessness and then when I feel this overwhelm, and address that fear. Address that fear from the child standpoint.
Yeah.
Does that regulate? Okay. And then if you are on the other end of it, which honestly nobody from the other end of it would be listening to this right now, but let's just for shit and giggles bring that in. You feel vindicated. You feel like you're ready to charge into change and you're ready to fight the fight and you're ready to make a difference and you're ready to wrong the right.
You feel I expect like you're in control. You're the resistance and you've just upset the empire and now you get to become the empire and you get to fix all the things that are obviously broken.
Yes.
And we get to, move forward in a new, better direction as a country. I expect.
Yes. So even though you do not feel despair, but you feel charged into action and motivation and to resistance and the fight.
You could rewind 4 years and there's a different feeling.
Anger.
It would be, I assume anger.
But anger's on the other side as well, too. It's just, if there is anger, the reason why I didn't go into anger, because that is a false emotion completely.
Anger's just there to cover up fear.
Helplessness and fear. Yeah. So I didn't start with anger, but some people who are completely emotional and aware are not even like, oh, hey, I'm feeling helpless or afraid or this is trauma. They're like, oh, I just feel anger.
Yeah. I mean, anger is sneaky because I've been angry. You feel anger. You're like, what do you feel? I feel angry. But anger is our psyche going, well, being scared really sucks. And you're hopeless and there's no control and I can't do anything about being scared. But anger, well, I can get behind anger. Anger can be used as a tool for change. Angry people can get stuff done. I can, do something with anger.
Well, the other side feels angry right now. The other side feels angry right now.
Yeah, but if you let it stop at anger, then you're lying to yourself because it is covering up fear. But it feels like it stops at anger. I know that because I've felt like it stopped at anger before myself.
Yeah, but that's just like rudimentary lack of emotional range. Period.
Right.
Zero processing. Is anger.
If you feel angry, the question is, what is the fear that the anger is trying to pacify? Yeah.
No, I have spent a lot of times as a child and even as an adult just being angry. And then, it was very obvious is because it is too much to go deeper.
Right.
It's easier to stay in anger because it gives you control.
Anger, yes, I guess that's what I was trying to say. Anger gives you this sense of control over something.
Feeling hopeless.
You can do something with anger.
Feeling hopeless.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like if you're in grief, anger is a very easy distraction in order not to feel hopeless.
Yeah.
Right? Because when you feel hopeless, then guess what? Well, chances are there's a lot under that, right? And so just the first step of going, if it's not anger and it's something else, the something else is usually hopelessness. And the hopelessness is, guess what? Fear of something. And the fear of what? And nobody wants to go there, right? So there's that scale. That's what was shocking is how many people are just there on anger and that they not even see this emotional scale.
Anger,
the goal yesterday was to allow people to go, oh, well, maybe, guess what? Maybe if we're feeling angry, maybe we're just feeling trauma. And that was the stopping point. The whole thing yesterday was to allow people to go, instead of us feeling angry, let's just recognize that it's actually trauma.
Right. Which is not false.
It's true.
But it's incomplete.
Yeah. And so from the other side, to go back into that, if the people on the other side now feel vindicated and they feel like they're going to be driven into action and they're going to change the country and they're going to change the world and everything is going to be better, that is still a masking of the action there is hiding, right? What you feel right now, which is still hopelessness of the current situation or the last 4 years. not meeting your needs or not being there
Yeah.
for you to feel comfortable. And so to some extent, it is actually more difficult for that side to reach awareness right now, is because it feels good to be in control. But the control is masking everything that you felt prior to Trump winning, which was fear of the current situation not being there to support you, which is hopelessness, which is, again, fear. Like, do you see what I mean? Like, everyone's in the same position. They're just masking it from different narratives.
That's the interesting thing. That's, I mean, almost the unfortunate part of the human condition is that when things go good, when things go your way, that makes it more difficult to do the work than when things...
Because you think there's no work to be done.
Because you think there's no work to be done. When things go bad, you're like, well, I feel crappy, and I don't want to feel crappy, so you have an incentive to go do the work. Because the work sucks, it's hard, and it feels really bad, and you're going to cry, and you're going to be angry, and you're going to be sad, and you're going to be afraid, and all those things are going to bubble up. That's the work. So for most people, it takes some sort of a traumatic event to light the fire of change. I think from what I saw yesterday, if that is a representative of the population, like the
50%,
the 49% or whatever, I think over the next few years there will be a like a mass enlightening of these people, because hopefully they will, do some work and go in and realize, where these feelings are really coming from. That or heart attacks and strokes. I don't know.
Yeah, you and I were trying to discuss this. I wonder, and this is not here as a narrative for hope or for change or for any kind of rudimentary us versus them narrative. This is just, you and I obviously are somewhere else for the most part, and we are so, I guess, keen on doing this work that we always look at the situation from like, okay, what is it doing for the larger narrative of Earth? What is it doing from the larger narrative of human awakening? Not as a political party, but just humanity, just like all of humanity.
Right. What is this doing?
American, Ukrainian.
What is the war in Ukraine or in Palestine doing for? Yeah, it's everything. This is a very useful example of to look at.
Yeah, and so for those people who are right now forced to face some sort of self-inflicted trauma, because let's be honest, it's a choice to feel trauma right now. That is their soul self, their higher soul self, basically going, guess what? You're going to grab on to this story or this narrative and you're going to lose it. And you're going to lose it, and it's going to be the end of the world. Like the bottom of the barrel, you're going to be down there. And you're going to not think that there's a way out. And you're going to hit your bottom. And then at that point, you can choose to either exit, right? Or you can choose to go, wait, I need to change my narrative. Something needs to change in order for me to not be stuck at the bottom, right? And I've recorded a channel thing on this. They always bring in, imagine...
Wait, what's the title of it?
I don't know. This is a channel thing that I did years ago.
I try to link to them if I know the title, but
I don't know what the title of it is. But they took the idea. This is the same idea as your pit hole. Pit hole of shit. But they took the idea of a barrel, right? And then imagine the barrel is full of liquid, right? And then at the bottom of it, right, you have settlement or balls. You have settled balls, right? And the density of the balls, I can't say apples because the apples float. But denser balls, something denser than apples, and they just have sunk down. And that is the trauma and density is at the bottom of the barrel, right? And then what I saw, where the channel version of a podcast that I saw is what you do is you start rattling you start rocking the barrel. You know how barrels roll, and then you can start just rocking because it's doing this, right? And what does it do?
It all sloshes out.
It sloshes out, and the balls, just through this vortex that you're creating within the barrel, start to pop up. Even though they're dense, they start to go up, right? On Instagram, a lot of people do the whole pouring of clean water into the dirty water. And then sooner or later, the dirty water flows out slowly and then gets replaced with clean water.
If you take a cup of muddy water and you just let it sit for a while, it will be, you'll have, I wouldn't drink it, but you'll have clear-ish water at the top and you'll have a bunch of sediment at the bottom.
Yeah, but that's the density and trauma. Right? And the clear is what's being masked to the idea that everything is hunky-dory. And then the election comes and all of a sudden, guess what? That is the stir because the trauma is like something just poked it, right? Whatever your personal trigger that you choose to have into this world, something just poked it. And all of a sudden, the sediment just went, and then all of a sudden the water is getting back muddier. And you're like, oh, too much, right? But that is basically this barrel, this water starting to get stirred up. So these balls can start to fly out. Because eventually, if enough centrifugal force starts doing this, and balls come up and up and up, and the barrel is not closed at the top, the balls will just start to fly out. And the density of your trauma will become lost, right? Or dissipate, right? Yeah. You will release. You will let go based on David Hawkins' standpoint, right? Yeah. Because you're allowing it to flow through you. You're acknowledging, oh yes, I do feel hopeless. I do feel afraid. I do feel trapped. And that's okay. But I'm allowing this to be my truth. And then when you allow that to be your truth, then gnosis happens, awakening happens. And guess what? Next time election comes around, you're no longer attached to Billy Bob's or Sally Sue. It doesn't matter, right? Yeah, so each one of these narratives that you grab onto is an opportunity for this clearing, for this de-densification of self. And so, interestingly, maybe this is why it goes back and forth all the time, is now the Democratic Party has a very good excuse for a trigger. And the Republican Party, unfortunately, right now, is kind of on the pause. Now, unless you're doing your own personal self-development, obviously there's still some things that will come into life from your personal narrative.
I'm sure, yeah. It's not hard to go find things out in the world that will trigger you.
Yeah, so it's almost like, interestingly, the Democratic Party has this cumulative morphic resonance of why all of them are doing work. And then the Republican Party has other triggers that they will be experiencing that are more personalized and more nuanced of why they're doing work.
But they get a 4-year break from
political. Excuse.
Yeah, they got the last 4 years. We get these next 4 years.
Yeah. You're not in this narrative. Again, don't bunch yourself in with the we. Yeah, right. At all times, everything will be coming up to our life. There will be just this triggering thing that all of a sudden possibly comes out of the blue. And for some of these people, it's out of the blue. That is the end of the world. But the only thing it's doing is basically allowing for these bubbles of density to come up so you can face your trauma.
Yeah, no, I like that. Because it is having something external to stir the pot.
Yeah.
Can really help push you in the right direction.
But that's all life is. All life
is a whole bunch of external things stirring the pot.
Yes. Like Earth is just that. If you're on Earth and you're still not sure what the fuck is going on, that's it. The whole point of Earth,
that's the point of life,
is to be here, to be triggered by all kinds of shit, so then you can release the childhood trauma that you decided to take on as your narrative and stop making excuses for it in the external world.
Yeah.
And the political narrative is external world. And the health narrative is external world. And AI narrative is external world. And the war is an external world.
Economy and you name it. Just turn on the news. There it is.
Yeah.
There's an endless list.
And I guess, when I say, this is what's interesting is, what's shocking to me and I think it will be shocking until it will not be shocking, is how many people do not see that as long as they spent their life grabbing onto these external narratives and disasterizing them into truth and avoiding going inside and going, how can I fix myself, instead of disasterizing into the world, both with action or with action.
Disasterizing and blaming.
Whatever. You could blame or you can disasterize. You can go internally. If you're a victim, you would go like, oh, look, God has forsaken me. And I know I'm judging here and I know this sounds rude, but that's what it is. Or you're like, oh, we're going to go and fight for this country. You're going to make this change happen.
Yeah.
Right? Literally resist. It's all resistance to you not facing yourself.
Right.
Yesterday when I said, what are they resisting? The answer was themselves.
Going back to we have like 5 main topics on this podcast. One of them is this, the trinary nature of
it's all trinary
the victim,
nature.
the resistance, and the empire. If you find yourself, I'm going to say this every time, if you find yourself as the victim, usually it's the victim, sometimes it's the resistance, rarely you feel like you're the empire, but if you find yourself in one of those 3 states, there's your big clue that this is triggering something inside of you, almost definitely a childhood trauma issue.
Yeah.
Right?
And the playground Earth, if you choose it to be, can just be there as a playground for you to play that game all the time. How can I spend the rest of my life on Earth being lost in the narrative where I'm the victim? Or being lost in the narrative where I have to be the resistance, or being lost in the narrative where, I have to be the enemy, because if I'm not the enemy, then somebody else will fuck me over.
Yeah.
That's it. That's narrative of Earth. And, Earth will continue to be in that narrative as long as we propagate that narrative.
Right. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes.
It's that way because it continues to be that way.
Yes. That's what's interesting is when I present this to people, everyone loves to be in denial so much.
They want to, it's like, but this is different because, and they'll have some weirdly specific example.
Yes,
and it's like, no, it feels it. And I have done this my whole life. It's like, yeah, but, this is really about me. This is, I was slighted by so-and-so and Bill at the office did it, but it's about,
In this case, it's even more removed than that. It's about us.
Right, but
they're even taking it further away. Instead of actually going, how is this about me? And what is it just triggering within me? They're going, oh no. Because, at some point nobody wants to go inside and face their own demons.
Right.
That's what it comes down to. All of this, the entire political narrative that has happened over the last year and will continue to happen over the next 2 years is people using political situation as a distraction for why, once again, they're not going to face their own trauma and why they're not going to face their own demons. And they love it as an excuse, right? Like to the point where I know this is going to sound mean, but they're almost happy that there's something in the outside world that they can find as a distraction away from having to face their own trauma and demons inside.
Right. I know that.
That's radical. I know that's radical.
Well, it's radical, but I agree with it because I know I have had all kinds of things in the outside world that I'm like, they're bad. They're objectively unpleasant things. But at the same time, there is this like, well,
projected.
Look, I get to focus on this. I have a focal point for my anger or my thoughts or whatever. And, now I can shine the spotlight over here instead of shining it in here.
Yeah.
There is a weird, twisted logic to that, but it works.
Yeah. It's people who are avoiding facing their own shadow right? Their own self, their own
Mhm.
trauma, right? Let's just say word trauma. We've been using word trauma. Secretly, subconsciously get very happy when they find an outside validation or similarity of their internal trauma in the outside world, because they grab onto it, they attach, and they use it as a hiding mechanism of not going inside. And everything out there right now, all the mindfulness workshops and all the political party rhetorics and everything out there, if you're using it to, or the Republican Party right now is using like, we won. If anything is out there you're grabbing onto to feel good or not feel bad about,
or even to feel bad.
No, it's everything. It's everything. It's, if there's anything on the outside of yourself that you're grabbing onto, both to feel good, to feel bad, or not to feel good, or not to feel bad, whatever the bullshit is, you are selling yourself on the false narrative that is keeping you away from facing your own truth, which is the trauma that you're refusing to acknowledge and process.
Yeah, it's a distraction.
Yes, and the political rhetoric has been, and it provided the best distraction to have,
Right.
of not to face your own demons.
Got an opinion, everyone's like, yay, or
Yeah. Yeah, and that's it. Like it's interesting that if you say that to someone, everybody just doesn't, like, looks at you as if you have
does not compute.
It does not compute. And they look at you as if you're some sort of maniac, or like a person from another planet who's speaking a different language, and they're like, what the fuck are you even saying
about? Of course this is really important and matters a lot, and of course I'm 100% justified in feeling how I feel. Why don't you?
Yeah And it's, I mean, maybe that is why I did not want to address this, is because in the long run, that is the political narrative has just provided everyone with an excuse to stay blind and to go la, 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 la. And I'm so viscerally against the blindness that it almost felt like addressing any one false premise for blindness would be doing injustice to the larger scope of personal development and growth.
Yeah.
But because we went there and I saw how many people are choosing the narrative
to dive in head first.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the details of what this happens to be become irrelevant.
But to say that is shocking to them.
Yeah. I mean, I just say that nonchalantly as if everybody just knows that's true.
But when I said that yesterday, people were shocked because I was literally an alien from another planet.
Yeah, but I guess the fact that this played out in this way, and if it played out the other way, we could address the other 50% of the population.
Yeah.
Is an amazing tool that we all have the opportunity to use to explore our triggers.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's a selection bias there, is that the people who are there are people who are triggered the most because they have spent the longest being blind to addressing and processing of their childhood traumas.
Probably. And I mean, it's been the longest, and they were all rather aged too.
That's what I mean. So they are triggered the most because they have spent the most time bearing the trauma.
Yeah.
And they have the most time being ill-equipped to handle trauma processing, because generationally, therapy or personal development or self-awareness is not
any of this touchy-feely, hippie stuff. I'm sure they could call it. Was not available, or not, look down upon. Probably.
Yeah, and I say that.
Taboo.
I say that I say that because we still till this day know some families who would look at therapy and personal, like just understanding of what is it that I actually feel
Right.
as like
We don't do that.
as a what would be the word? Because your parents did that too.
Yeah,
Like, what
I
is
mean,
that sentiment?
Like there's some
Embarrassment,
embarrassment, some
shameful,
shame,
and
it's
embarrassment.
something that you don't want people to know about, and therefore you don't do. Yeah, I mean, therapy yeah, it was just something that you don't do, and if you do it, you certainly don't talk about it
Because
of the perceived perception of others,
yeah,
ostensibly.
Yeah, ostensibly. But the shame comes out as I am ashamed of what I am inside. I am not accepting my own being
Right.
as it is. Therefore, because I'm already spending lifetimes and lifetimes hiding what I actually feel that is my truth, to go into a public setting, or let's say even a therapeutic setting, and to admit that I'm hiding something from myself would be counterproductive to the hiding process that I'm spending my entire life working at.
Ironically, that's when it would do the most good, is because it forces that conflict to the forefront of your mind. It's like, I can't admit it, but I'm here and I have to admit it.
But you would never.
But you'd never put yourself in that position.
Yeah. So the narrative that exists whenever you have spent your entire life not facing your shadow, not facing your trauma, exists
to preserve that inertia.
To preserve not feeling what you actually feel inside, not to acknowledge the broken child that you already have inside of you.
Right.
And so therapy by default then is basically acknowledging that you're broken and then willingly stepping into a space of addressing your broken child. But if you spend your lifetime not even acknowledging that the broken child exists, then you will run away 120% from all therapy.
Why would I go to therapy in that case?
Yeah. But again, therapy, I say therapy
as the entire bubble of any sort of
awareness
work.
of gnosis, of knowing thyself.
When it's like, at this point in my life, it's like, that is literally the purpose of life.
Yeah.
There's, it's not about amassing fame or fortune or building a legacy or, even, family, all those, family might, the other one's ridiculous, but family might be, it's important, but it's like, I would be doing a disservice to you or the kids if I wasn't trying to, I say better myself, but figure myself out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? If the me from 10 years ago would be doing a disservice to everybody in this house.
Yeah. Right. But there's that stigma too. You have to admit that you have been doing things wrong.
Yeah.
And if you're 60 or 50 or 70 or 80,
it probably only gets harder.
That is a lot of admitting.
It only gets harder, which is why,
So to begin with, that shame that you will feel knowing that the 70 years worth of your actions have been at the expense of your loved ones.
Yeah.
Would be a really difficult and hard thing to handle. And hence the exits. Hence, that's why so many people are exiting, is because they're faced with that amount of shame and grief, having to recognize everything that they have done to their loved ones. And then they are unable to regulate and handle.
Watch the recent episode, Love is, what do we call it?
Love is abuse.
Love is abuse.
Yeah, that, but then also the suicide episode, right? Because then, because if you're not going to forgive yourself whenever you find your truth, that's when suicide happens, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't get past that threshold of going, yeah, this is just human life. There's nothing to forgive. This is just a human life of me to remain blind until I choose seeing.
Right.
And then how do I forgive yourself? How do you forgive everyone around you for just being there as your theatrical partner in the clusterfuck of shit that is Earth, right? And that's what
Yeah.
it is. That the reason why I didn't want to address the political situation is because it is just a clusterfuck of shit with another bow on
Yeah.
top of it.
No matter which way it goes, it's a clusterfuck. of
Yeah,
shit.
all of it is clusterfuck of shit. And it's just another excuse to remain blind to your own trauma and unprocessing and an acknowledgement of your own pain. And so I almost don't want to address any one artificially created narrative because of that. But in this case, it is such a large narrative that so much of a population has grabbed into from both ends. 100% of the United States population is in this narrative. Unless there are those who are actually working on self-awakening.
99.8% of the U.S. population is in it.
Yeah, but if you are actually working on self-awareness, then for you and me, it was a great platform to go,
That's the thing.
look.
It was a wonderful, a real world example of here's
how I would have been and everything. Trigger central and how I can address the triggers. And look, it's triggering unsafety. Well, look, it's triggering hopelessness. So, with me, like I just can't see it anywhere but unsafety. And with you, maybe love, I don't know. But maybe because it wasn't triggering for you because it wasn't even triggering love. There's no way triggering at all.
This wasn't super triggering. When we divided into groups and we're sitting around talking and, it's like, okay, well, how are you doing? And everyone's like, I'm not doing good. And I'm like, shit, I can't just say, I'm doing all right. Because that's just going to sound, untactful to this group who is clearly in the depths of it. So I'm like, I'm just not going to answer that. And I'm going to say, well, before, I did get a little involved, but everyone was doing. I have been at funerals, which there was less trauma at funerals than there was yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
For reals, I'm not exaggerating that.
Yeah.
I was really taken aback by how much it must feel like it matters.
Well, think about it. Funeral, for the most part, adults admit to grief.
It's okay to admit to grief.
Yeah, and you're okay admitting to grief, and it's okay to not know how to process grief. And you know that it will take time, that it will take healing, but you recognize that grief is okay feeling to have.
And it's inevitable. Everybody's going to die, and Uncle Joe died. And
it hurts. But you can admit that grief is a higher density emotion to where you're able to accept and acknowledge as your truth. But fear is something that we actively avoid feeling.
It feels like, well, time will heal grief, but time will not heal fear. If anything, time's going to make fear worse because it's just going to sit there and fester.
Yeah. So because grief is easier for us to acknowledge, accept, and admit to, and then thus try to work through, because culturally, societally, like it is not shameful to feel grief. But for the most part, the societal norms is like, it is shameful to be afraid. It is shameful to feel hopeless. It is shameful to feel unsafe and feel like a broken child. Right. And because the age group of individuals who were there have lived in that narrative of like, you don't address your emotions. You don't feel, you don't acknowledge the fact that you're afraid. You don't process that. It is completely foreign to most of them to stop back and go, wait, I am just afraid. I'm a broken child and I'm afraid. Now, I say that and I don't mean it cocky at all, because I was also in that standpoint. And with me, 30-something years of feeling that was also difficult. Yeah. But I can only imagine how much more difficult it would be if I doubled that 30 years.
Yeah. No, it's really hard. And, it's not like we're not still broken children. In many ways.
Yeah, but I'm okay being broken.
There's an acceptance to it of I'm broken, and that's fine. There's this judgment that gets removed from it. There was a lot of judgment in it yesterday. A lot of I don't even want to go there.
No, the judgment that was there was misplaced. the judgment was onto self, not being able to regulate. Because what they are feeling inside is so overwhelming and overpowering, but they are not acknowledging that the judgment is to the inside. I'm not able to actually even comprehend the world right now because my insides are overriding. But because they're not allowing themselves to feel the override that is so personalized as internal, they can't compute with it not connecting to the outside world. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's like literally, if there's a mathematical software sequence that has to run in order to be able to compute, and then the two sides of the formulas have to equate in order to balance themselves out, they're not letting the formula run. The software is not able to run. So this portion is overriding and it's not connecting to the regulation.
Mm.
And you're just stuck.
Yeah.
They're stuck in a non-computing sequence.
Yeah.
Which is that, I mean, I hate to say it, that's when change happens.
That's a wonderful catalyst for change.
It's the most important catalyst for change because they're basically at the lowest of the low and they can't compute.
Right. And I mean, all said, this is a relatively soft bottom. Nobody's dying. Nobody's, it's.
Yeah, but if they can't compute, they will exit.
Yeah, but this is between this and, almost overdosing on the side of the road with heroin. This is a lot.
Yeah.
Better than that.
Yeah. Universally, right? The God is providing them with a great opportunity.
This is very soft. So I'm sure it doesn't feel like it, but this is better than a heroin overdose.
Yeah, or a car accident, right?
Yeah.
Or having your house being burned down, or anything that actually matters.
Right.
Yeah, right. So yes. I mean, I think it's, in a way, it is the most beautiful grace of the universe, and actually a gift of God, to give these people or us this amazing platform that actually means absolutely nothing.
Right.
To use as a tool.
It's an opportunity
to awaken yourself.
Yeah.
To like understanding of, what am I actually afraid of? What am I actually hurting about? What am I actually crying about? If I am blaming God, what am I actually blaming myself for? And if I am crying and shaking and I feel like this is the end of the world, what is actually happening inside?
Right.
That has nothing to do with this.
What did I feel a long time ago that this feels like?
Yeah. No, it's right. So
that's a wrap.
The end.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.